Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Fraggoth Reads. Last time I accidentally cut my mic off early, but fortunately I was done reading by then. Sorry about that. Anyway, hi. We're still reading through Red Noise by John P. Murphy. So previously on, our protagonist, as yet, who's gone from nameless to having too many names, has been busy. So her name is the Miner, Jane, or Mickey fucking Mouse. Fucking is the middle name. And she's been busy. She's gone off and gotten a bit of revenge on the corporate guy, the Anaconda Corporation guy, for shafting her with the mining assay, the ore assay. She's gotten some fat stacks. She has made other kinds of killing, though. She killed a dude who she had, in a power move, yanked a lip ring out of. He came after her in a dark alleyway, and she deleted him. And so, with her sword, she's got one of those. And this, of course, makes Angelica, the person opposing Feeney, who the miner is now working for, this makes her ears perk up, or her eyebrows perk up. Her interest is piqued. So, from here, who knows what could happen? A tour of the facilities. The miner didn't want to go back to her ship, or bring any kind of attention to it at all, so she took Feeney up on the offer of a hotel room. Finest accommodations in 1,000,000 kilometers. Clean linens. Thread, mind you, not plastics. And the same mattress I sleep on my own self. It's luxury, I'm telling you. Luxury wasn't free, but she'd taken 10,000 off him and 20 off Gordonson, so giving back 100 a night didn't sting too bad. And as space station hotel rooms went, it was positively swanky. A good quarter-meter on all sides of a bed in which she could lay out both arms and only her hands falling over the sides. The ceiling was painted with a video screen, there were VR rig hookups, and the washroom door could be closed so that the head doubled as a gravity shower, which the panel cheerfully informed her could be activated for a mere 50 credits. The commode flushed for free, a good tactical decision given the number of one-night stays, but the bidet cost 3 per use. The sink cost the same, though the UV sterilizer was free. The miner watched the UV flicker and mentally reviewed her day to recall if she'd shaken hands with anyone. She sat on the bed a while, staring at the door and deciding how best to handle it. After a while, she went and banged on the wall for a couple of minutes until she was reasonably sure there was either nobody next door or they were too polite to complain. Either would suit her purpose. She left the room again, and with the aid of a few tools, unlocked the door of the neighboring room. Satisfied she could get in and out without trouble, she left a little light sensor in the old room, closed the door, and went to the new room where she could finally relax. The hard mattress had lumps like ribs running from head to foot, and whatever thread the sheets were made of was apparently trying very hard to be as plastic-like as possible. Softer than her bunk, but too unfamiliar to be comfortable, and with a faint smell like rubber. She whiled away the time by checking in on her ship. The plants were doing fine, humidity and temperature were in good shape, and the sun lamps had gone off for the night, but the last still picture showed only 2 fallen leaves from the bonsai and no visible wilting on the orchids. The outside cameras showed 2 ships leaving, that slick private ship filled with academics, and the freighter that was carrying the Provisioner and Gordonson away. That reminded her to check, and she saw that the fuel, air, and water had actually been delivered, and the provisions had been loaded into external hatch B. That had been a good investment, little airlocks with one-time access codes, so she didn't have to let deliveries come in through the main airlock and get access to the whole ship. She tried to call up a book, but without a proper reader, she couldn't concentrate. And anyway, she wasn't in the mood for the mystery novel she'd been working through. Life was complicated enough. After double-checking the sensors and the lock, she turned off the lights and set her communicator to produce background noise, what the ship called pink noise. That was the beginning of a lengthy staring into darkness, of her active mind reminding her of her problems and anxieties. She'd planned for it, mentally tallying the things she needed to think through in the long hours, and added to that list when she'd felt the uncomfortable mattress. There were always the sleeping pills, if necessary. She dropped off to sleep at some point, though, and woke to her alarm instead of an hour before it. For a moment she assumed that she'd set it wrong, but it was 0600 station time. More sleep than usual, an unexpected bonus. She hadn't undressed and only needed time to wash as cheaply as possible before slipping out the door and down the hall. Here and there people slept on the floors, and she found the bar full of snoring toughs. There was an impressive kitchen behind the bar, 4 prep tables, 2 big induction grills and 2 gas stoves, a couple combo ovens, and sinks with faucets that ran freely. The place was a disaster and smelled of mold, but the equipment still functioned. The miner threw together a scrounged breakfast of some kind of off-brand artificial egg cooked in a pan that might have been clean. Then she wandered out into the lobby, eating straight from the pan with a fork. The nice thing about living on emergency rations was that pretty much any edible food tasted good. She finished half the pan, walking between the sleepers as she ate. The Galleria's daylights were coming up gradually, and she could see the scraggly-looking palm trees through the big windows like great big spidery shadows. A cleaning robot buzzed and bumped merrily among the tables, but otherwise she was the only moving thing around. The place was peaceful, almost pleasant. It was while returning to the kitchen to replace the dirty pan that the miner heard arguing.
No way, just the 3 of us?
It'll be fine. As long as Blue gets back from the can, we'll head out. As soon as Blue gets back from the can, we'll head out.
They're going around in 4s now. I don't want to be outnumbered. I want to outnumber them.
The miner set the pan gently on the floor and stood with arms folded against the wall next to the door.
We don't have time. Feeney said to relieve the guys watching the cooks, okay? And he said don't back down from a fight.
Yeah, cool, fine, but I don't want to get my ass kicked, alright? Let's wake up a couple more guys, see if they can watch our back.
Shit. I told you that'll take forever, and that fucker McMasters said he'd arrest groups that are too big.
So what?
So they have stun batons and they fucking hurt, that's what.
Getting fucking stabbed fucking hurts too.
The miner waited until she heard a third voice saying, I'm back, what's wrong with you assholes? Before she turned the corner and the conversation stopped dead. I heard you were looking for a fort, she said offhandedly. She rested her hand on the hilt of her sword and yawned. I could use some exercise. They fell over themselves to invite her along. None of the 3 of them looked like much of a fighter, the miner thought. The girl they'd been waiting on, Blue, looked like a nervous scarecrow with fractal-style blue tattoos and jean-modded hair resembling teal-painted aluminum. She had a kind of makeshift cutlass at her hip, and a couple of knives strapped to her jacket and pants in ways that would make them a pain to draw in a fight, probably literally. The big guy, Khan, saw the miner looking, made a wrong guess, and confided with a waggle of his thick unibrow,
Rumor is, if you get her clothes off, she's got bits that glow. Guess what color?
Khan was tall and wide, but really just big, not muscular. He wore black from head to toe and fingered a structural spar that had been sharpened down like a heavy machete. A little cartoon cat head on a chain grinned up at her in its pendulum swing. They hurried to explain that Feeney wanted someone to check in on the cooks, who the miner took to be making drugs down below on Deck 6, away from where people lived.
They don't exactly work for the old man.
The heavy-set guy with all the bright red dyed scars, Scratch, explained as they made for the door. He had some kind of cudgel with faint ridges like they might have come out of a printer, and it only took a few minutes of watching him apparently search for fleas to understand his nickname.
But they agreed to only sell through him.
The miner nodded thoughtfully. So the four of us go check on them and make sure Angelica's not horning in. Maybe have some fun if they are.
Yeah.
Make that 5, came a voice from behind the miner. Mary Feeney crossed her arms and made clear that 5 was the right number for that bit of fun.
I want to make sure we're getting our money's worth.
More the merrier, the miner said, and wondered whether Mary was keeping tabs on her for her grandfather or out of her own suspicions. They set off through the hotel back passages, downstairs, and to the door for laundry and deliveries. The miner let the original 3, now comforted and psyched by their honor guard, prattle on about how much ass they were going to kick and how sweet this was all going to be. What kind of fighters does Angelica have? The miner wondered aloud. The chorus of response indicated that the other side was so feeble it was amazing they hadn't all blown away with the first really bad fake egg fart. The miner bit back the question about why old man Feeney was having such a hard time beating them. Instead, she thought about some of the rumors. I heard Del Rio's brother's something.
Raj?
Scratch looked uncomfortable.
Yeah, he's pretty tough, I guess. Not as tough as you, lady. Or you, Mary.
Mary looked troubled and stared at the deck as they walked.
Don't go gunning for the brass, she muttered. Assassination's off limits. That's from the old man himself.
All right, the miner said. I'll steer clear. Where should I steer clear of, just to be sure?
She snorted. Transparent. Just don't fight him if you see him. Him or Angelica.
You'll have to kill Angelica eventually, you know. This two-party thing isn't stable.
I'm sure you're so sad about that.
The miner shrugged. I got paid in advance, she said. I want you to win so I look good, but I don't actually care.
Well, I care. I fucking live here.
So do they. Someone's gonna be unhappy. The Three Stooges had long since gone quiet, realizing too late that this wasn't going to be as fun an outing with their side's two toughest fighters as they thought.
Well, Granddad's paying you, so it better not be us.
The miner yawned. They descended a staircase, having independently decided that being stuck in an elevator was a bad idea, and came to a T intersection. They stopped when they heard the hallmark of bad ambushes everywhere, the excited whisper, "Here they come!" followed by multiple voices going, "Shh!" They exchanged looks, the Three Stooges nervous, Mary cautious, and the miner exasperated. "Ours?" Khan murmured. Mary shook her head, no. I expected a better class of idiot, the miner said, not whispering. She popped her sword's magnetic clasps with her thumb, and the click echoed down the empty passage. There was another long silence. A head poked out around the corner and ducked back. Hurried whispering drifted down the hallway, too confused to be made out over the low drone of the ventilation fans, but the syllable "shit" figured prominently. Then the 5 of them heard running.
That was fun,
said Mary. Ish, said the miner. The Stooges came down from their adrenaline highs with whoops and laughs, jeering down the passageway at their fleeing foes and slapping each other on the back. Their party continued on toward hydroponics, or so the miner assumed, as they followed a series of turns that left her disoriented, but which the other 4 seemed to know well enough to not even pause at the splits. The old military layout was designed to be hard to navigate for anyone not wearing a keyed-in personal nav. She wondered if the others had one, but there were no signs of them listening to sub-audible instructions. They passed old bloodstains a couple of times, and then a relatively fresh pool, stinking badly. 2 trails led from it up the passageway for a long way before fading. The miner wondered if their janitorial staff had any humans left, and if so, how long it would take before they snapped and killed everybody just to have time to catch up. Small bits of trash and other clutter collected in corners and along the walls.
"We're keeping the bots busy," said Blue, probably thinking along the same lines as they passed the clotted dark puddle. "You guess that was one of theirs or ours?"
"Can't tell you apart by the smell of your blood yet," the miner said. 10 more steps down the hall, Mary said,
"She's joking."
The Stooges dutifully laughed. The second ambush was much better. The miner heard a faint buzzing noise as they entered an intersection with a cross hallway, and 2 groups descended on them from both sides. She'd been walking with her hand resting on her sword. She had it out of her sheath the moment a buzzer sounded, and up in time to deflect a blow from a sledgehammer by way of its bearer's exposed wrist, then to step into the person swinging it down over his head and slice up the length of his torso. 1 step to the right, away from the gout of blood, put her in view of 3 other attackers arrayed behind him. There was a brief moment where they stared each other down. A crackling and buzzing stun baton and 2 knives waved uncertainly in the air as their hammer-wielding comrade gurgled and whined in pain as he fell to 1 knee against the wall. The baton holder immediately behind him made a move, just a twitch, and the miner lashed out with the tip of her sword, a single stroke up the forearm to tear it open and send the buzzing weapon flying and its wielder stumbling away. Her combat augments hummed from the exertion, keeping her muscles taut and flushing their cells with microdose painkillers and nutrients. She had her sword up and looked between the 2 intact fighters, each holding their knives like they were life rafts. She realized abruptly that she was grinning as she prepared to cut them down. "Scram!" she yelled, and they turned and ran pell-mell away. The dropped baton spun into the pool of spreading blood where it sizzled and crackled. A hot iron smell assaulted her, humid and cloying. She turned and surveyed the fight that had commenced behind her, 4 on 4. Mary was a competent knife fighter, lean and nimble. The miner studied her and filed the knowledge away for future reference. She knew when to engage, had a feel for the enemy's reach, and wasn't afraid to get in close when it made her enemy's movements more awkward. Definitely one to watch when things got to their inevitable endgame. The other 3 were about what she'd expected. Enthusiastic amateurs who did a lot of darting forward and backward, waving their weapons like a single touch would wound. Blue had already been tagged and was bleeding from her left shoulder, but was keeping her opponent off by virtue of standing between the taller Khan and the wall, and waving her makeshift cutlass like a feather duster. The miner watched for a little while, then waded in, sword first. "Coming in behind," she warned, and did just that, gently elbowing aside 2 of the fighters so as to step neatly between them and take out their opponents with a single V-shaped stroke from left to right, down across the torso and up against a thigh and upper arm. The flashing blade and resulting screams were close enough to let the other 2 overwhelm their The flashing blade and resulting screams were enough to let the other 2 overwhelm their foes. Mary's enemy got the picture and fled, unchased. "Good," Mary said, and turned to see the body on the floor behind her and the blood on the deck and wall. She looked a question at the miner, who swung her sword up once to shake the blood from it in a wide arc spray along the wall, then grabbed a handful of Mary's jacket to wipe off the rest. "The hell!" "Didn't bring a hanky," the miner said, sheathing her weapon. The magnets caught it with a click that made the Stooges flinch. She looked down at her gray-green jumpsuit, flecked with blood but not badly stained. It had come out in the wash. The two she'd cut down last lay groaning on the deck, and the guy with the sledgehammer had gone still. "Should we let someone know about these?"
"Angelica already knows, I promise," said Mary. "She can deal with her own dead, but we'd better push on before she does. How's your arm, Blue?"
The Scarecrow girl put on a show of toughness, but was weaving from blood loss and pain. The miner made an impatient noise and poked at the wound, eliciting a high-pitched gasp from between the fighter's clenched teeth. It wasn't deep, but it was bleeding freely. They managed to scavenge cloth from Sledgehammer's skirt to tie it up tight. Then they hustled away from the intersection before the survivors could bring in reinforcements. Once they were well away from the sight of bodies and the smell of blood, the two unwounded stooges started in on how awesome that was, and precisely how much ass it had kicked. Blue walked woodenly, but quietly kept up. What all's down here, anyway? Mary glanced at the miner, suspicious.
Big hydroponics operation. Soy and beans, pretty much. And algae and fish. Yeast tanks and bioreactors below that, and reclamation.
Your grandfather got a hand in it?
She shook her head. It's neutral ground. Company rep and McMasters would shit if we made a move, and anyway, there's no money in it. We pulled out most of what we had in the lower decks, but the geeks down here cooking are too tied into utilities, so we have to keep guards.
Seems easy to overrun.
Nah, Mr. Shine wouldn't stand for any real fighting. This is just maintaining a presence.
Who's Mr. Shine? She ignored her. Khan glanced back with a wary look on his face, but then pretended he hadn't heard. What are they cooking, anyway? Amphetamines? Damn popular among the miners and transport navigators, the kind of people for whom every hour alert and awake meant money.
All kinds of shit,
Scratch contributed, suddenly enthusiastic.
Meth, smack, reds, dust.
Acid, said Blue.
Acid,
Agreed Scratch.
coke, crack.
Roofies,
Said Khan.
Roofies, red-eye, molly, lizard, fenty, thick, all kinds of stuff. And it's all really cheap right now on account of the old man can't move it after Sparks went for Angelica.
Mary stared at Scratch, but he didn't see it. Then she turned her glare on the miner.
You don't need to know details, just don't get ideas. The geeks down here are ours. You'll probably pull a protection shift if there's trouble, but so far Angelica hasn't touched anyone but the fighters.
So the passageways are fair game? She gave the miner a distrustful look, but nodded once. But, the miner said, she won't hit the lab.
Right.
Because Mr. Shine won't stand for it. Again, the distrustful look.
Right.
And
Where the fuck have you been?
a scruffy woman in leathers leaned out of a hatchway. You're fucking late! She cut herself off and stood up straight when she saw Mary and the miner trailing the three stooges. Trouble?
nothing we couldn't handle,
Said Khan. He grinned.
We pissed them off pretty good, though, so, you'll probably all die on the way back.
The leather-clad woman gave them a worried look, but Mary shook her head.
Come back with us. We've got to meet with the reinforcements.
The miner raised an eyebrow and wondered what passed for reinforcements on Station 35. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Toby Frost. Reinforcements. Geronimo Rommel stamped back and forth in his tiny shared cabin on a rickety old transport ship he'd spent over a week in, crammed practically shoulder to shoulder with all the lowlifes, misfits, and dimwits Station 32 had coughed up. All the idiots who'd been given a choice between a ticket and the brig, who needed to skip town while something else cooled off, or who just wanted a good old-fashioned fight or some cash. Rommel himself was a professional. He did his fighting for money, thank you, and he had 3 offers to do just that, which he thought was out-fucking-standing. The trouble was, the transport ship's captain had just come on the horn and said they were putting into a boarding orbit on Station 35, and he still hadn't picked one. Fuck, he said aloud. His 2 bunkmates had been ignoring him for hours, no matter how much noise he made, and he found that irritating. They were not impressed by his 3 offers, and he found that even more irritating. 8 days in a tiny cabin with a couple of stuck-up assholes who didn't recognize their betters just irritated a man. Here he was, a natural leader of men, fresh off yet another lucrative job, with his hand offered in friendship to his fellow mercenaries, and the idiots just snubbed him. He hadn't even managed to bang any of them, and that irritated him too. He pulled his duffel down from the foot of his bunk, the second one up the bulkhead, and slapped it noisily on the communal table. He unzipped it and rummaged to no real purpose, but it gave those jerks a nice view of what he'd brought. An electro-slug rifle, broken down but still pretty obvious. A sawed-off repeating shotgun with bespoke gold inlay on the barrel that read Gilgamesh in calligraphic script. 2 serrated combat knives, he nonchalantly placed one on the table while he rummaged, and a short military-issue Tonto blade with a custom embossed gold dragon on the side that looked pretty goddamn wicked. His pad was down at the bottom, where he'd put it before, wrapped in a black shirt. All his clothes were black. Sure thing, Toby Frost. Thanks for hopping in while you could. He left the bag ostentatiously gaping as he leaned against the bulkhead, idly swiping through his messages on the gunmetal gray pad.
3,000 from someone named John Feeney, he mused half aloud. That's not too bad. That's not bad. Or 2,000 from Angelica Del Rio, with some interesting perks. Or, he added almost as an afterthought, 3,500 from some law guy, Thomas McMasters. That's a tough decision, mates.
He happened to glance up at the other 2 guys in the cabin, each lying on their own bunks. The guy on the bottom bunk, Ing, was curled up with his back to the cabin and a pillow wrapped around his head. The guy up on the top bunk, called himself the Bastard, was watching porn again. Morons. Rommel zipped up his bag, thumbed the lock, then heaved it up onto the middle bunk again. He stuck the knife in his pocket and grabbed the pad and wandered out into the gangway. The transport ship wasn't that big, and it didn't take long to reach the galley, passing 5 more cabins full of assholes. He wondered again how much the captain made on this trip. 22 passengers paying 200 credits apiece plus meals, at least. He assumed they all paid the same fare. They all got on at Station 32, anyway. He frowned, wondering if anyone else had gotten a cheaper fare than him, whether anyone had gotten more invitations to the captain's bunk than he had, and shaved some credits off, maybe. Didn't matter. He was getting distracted. Call it 40,000 credits and whatever saleable stuff people forgot, or, quote, forgot, unquote, when they got off. There was the captain, an engineer, and a cook who was also a pilot. The ship was former military. While it didn't smell like cabbage and washed away puke, its origin was unmistakable, which meant expensive but reliable. He kept trying to do the math in his head for how much profit a guy could make each trip, and how much he'd need to start off, but all the maybes and ballparks piled up, and in the end he wasn't sure if the captain was a millionaire or deep in debt. He shook his head. A soldier of fortune like himself ought to have a retirement plan, but better not to obsess over it. Be loose, flexible, see what drops in your lap. That was the way to do it. "I'm thinking Feeney," said Artemis, a buff chick with no hair anywhere on her, and a fondness for lying. No. Okay.
My tongue said, no, you don't get that.
"I'm thinking Feeney," said Artemis, a buff chick with no hair anywhere on her and a fondness for knives. "The guy with the hotel. The Del Rio woman with the casino sounds stingy as hell, and I haven't slept on a proper bed in ages." Rommel went for the coffee dispenser, pretending not to listen to the conversation around the galley table. There were a couple of "me toos." "Nix," came the first dissent, a gangly gunman named Huey with some really interesting implants that gave tiny electric shocks. "Ever see how casinos are built? Cameras and stuff everywhere. Those places are locked down tighter than prisons. Maybe it pays less, but I call that a safe gig, me." Then we ain't supposed to fraternize anymore," Artemis said, waggling her forehead where her eyebrows would have been. "Didn't sign nothing yet," Huey said with a leer. "You want to go counter-offer?" Rommel lost track of that conversation when a couple more people going for Angelica Del Rio started to explain themselves too, all at the same time.
"Anyone going for this McMasters guy?" he called out.
Two cautious hands went up, a guy and a girl he didn't know by name. He studied their sheepish faces and just grunted. Nobody asked him in turn as he poured his lousy coffee. And that was just as well, since he didn't really have an answer yet anyway. The slow realization that they'd all, or almost all, gotten 3 offers annoyed him. He tried casually to peer over shoulders at pads, wristmonds, and ink on hands. And at least he'd been offered more than them. A lot more than some of them. A few probably wouldn't even make back the cost of the trip. He stood back, sipped at the thin mud pissed out by the machine, and frowned at the room. They'd spent the whole week boasting about their fighting skills, and as someone who had actually seen combat, he had mostly considered it idle chatter. But now that the ship full of miscellaneous mercenaries was actually at its destination, he gave them a second look, and wasn't sure what he saw. They were amateurs, most of them. A few had unit or platoon tats, but none of them looked authentic. Still, they were all pretty athletic, and looked like scrappers. Some wiry, some beefy. He could take them down if he had to or wanted to, but some of them would go down hard, he had to admit. Trouble was, there was no telling where they'd go to, or who he'd wind up fighting. No rhyme or reason to who got offers from the gangs or from security. Hell of a place, this Station 35. Something else bothered him. He'd gotten desperately bored enough to look at the telescope view of the station, and he recognized a beat-up old mining ship that he was pretty sure belonged to a beat-up old intelligence corps officer who flipped the verse 2 birds at the end of her last mission and went off to work at the remotest patch she could find. He didn't want to cross her path if he could avoid it. That was a lethal kind of mistake even for a badass like him. Probably she wasn't involved, but if she was, who was she in with? Security, probably, knowing her. Probably. He remembered something else about her. She'd taught him about this guy Sun Tzu, who said, if you know your enemy, and you know yourself, you have nothing to worry about. Or something like that. With all these probablys stacking up, though, he was starting to feel like he didn't know shit. No 2 ways about it. All his instincts told him this was a bad job. Hey! Oh, that's a woman. Hey! The captain showed up in the hatchway. She had a worried look on her face, and her eyes were scanning the room. Just so you know, Chief of Security on this station just gave me a heads up that there's a blanket firearms ban on Station 35. Anything that shoots gets confiscated. Anyone who tries to smuggle on board anything that shoots gets spaced. She put her hands up like she could quell the shouts of outrage. Rommel frowned hard. Gilgamesh had set him back 2 whole jobs' worth of profits, and it was worth a lot more than that after his mods. It had saved his sorry ass on at least 3 occasions. Don't bitch at me, it's not my rule. Take it up with McMustard, or whoever he is. What? What if we go to work for McMasters? Some kid asked. He's the security guy, right? Or is that Feeney? He didn't say. Ask him yourself. We're on the station network now, so there's no comm fees. She folded her arms and unfolded them again. Look, I'm no arms dealer, and I don't want to be, but anything you want to sell me, I'll try to pay a fair price. It's that, or take your chances. That's as good as I can give you, all right? Rommel watched the groaning crowd and caught the arm of a good-looking tough guy with no neck. Fergus, was that what he called himself? Looked and talked like he might plausibly have been ex-military, too.
Hey, Rommel murmured, did I hear you say you hadn't gotten an offer from McMasters?
What's it to you? The guy rumbled.
I think that stinks, Rommel said, keeping his voice low and his smile friendly, and I got a proposition for you.
Murder, maybe? Mary led the way back and didn't seem to notice or mind that the miner lagged behind. She watched Feeney's granddaughter, flanked by 3 tired toughs as she navigated back passages through a circuitous route that would probably avoid trouble. Deck 6 was down deep in the station, close to what she thought was Mr. Schrine's territory. Mr. Shine's territory. Deck 6 was down deep in the station, close to what she thought was Mr. Shine's territory, him and his people who called themselves Morlocks, but she didn't see much evidence that anyone still lived or worked there. The miner mused as she walked, decided one option was to come back that night. 3 a.m. station time, maybe, if everyone was asleep. Explosives would do the trick. Nice empty corner of the station. Relieve the guards. They'd believe Feeney would send her. Oh. Relieve the guards. They'd believe Feeney would send just her to relieve 3 of them. At least they'd believe it long enough for her to take care of them. Take care of the chem geeks. Set the explosive somewhere impressive, but safe. Safe-ish. Work of an hour, and she'd be back at the hotel, ready to help the enraged old man get his revenge on that witch. The miner didn't ask what route they were taking, and Mary didn't explain. She played the good little bodyguard, watching the boss's granddaughter because the others were too tired, stupid, and feckless to. She found herself tempted. Off marry Feeney, and it would drive John Feeney spare. From idle talk she'd gathered that his family was his one major weakness. If he thought Angelica's goons had done her, or grabbed her, whatever peace there was would be over. Herrera would have his excuse pretty damn fast. It might solve the McMaster's problem, too. Either the mustachioed twerp would get steamrolled, or he'd sense the change in the wind and do his damn job. She liked the idea, liked it a lot, and yet somehow found herself not murdering anyone. The 5 of them walked briskly but quietly, and all seemed to keep breathing. Her first rationalization was that Feeney going spare might go way over the top, might even flat out win. But that was nonsense. She could handle him, if by no other way than through switching sides. Her second rationalization was that despite herself, she liked Mary Feeney. The kid was too clever by half, and even kind of fun when she had a drink and loosened up. But she was also an enthusiastic and capable part of a criminal gang that had destroyed a lot of lives and livelihoods. She was more serious than her blustering and fickle grandfather, which made her dangerous as hell. Anyway, the miner had met a lot of corrupt SOBs in her time behind enemy lines. She'd liked them too, and knew not to get sentimental. Besides, she also liked Takata and Herrera, and this was their home too. Her third rationalization, probably the real one, was harder to express to herself. She'd killed in cold blood before, sure. She'd killed for flag and country and other bullshit. She'd killed to survive and for advantage. And then she'd bought a ship and some mining equipment and set herself to a life alone with plants, books, and rocks. Yeah, it was also before getting ripped off by some little toads and coming face to face with a lot of people who really had it coming. But if she wanted to just kill people, she could make a hell of a lot more money just doing that. She was giving the toads a chance, at least. It might not be a fair fight, but it never was. She continued to ponder her ethical position until Mary stopped abruptly with one finger in the air. All it would take is a couple more steps, pretend to not be paying attention, to be caught up short, then have her sword out and cut them down before they knew what was happening. Her sword stayed sheathed, and she halted in her tracks. "Good news," Mary said. She turned and smiled. "Transport ship's in, and we managed to hire about half the crop." The miner frowned. "What do you mean?" "We made offers to everyone aboard, crew included. A bunch of them signed up." "How many?" Mary smirked. "Afraid of the competition? Too many and not enough. You want to count them, get moving." She paused, giving the miner a speculative look. "Why don't you take the lead?" Geronimo Rommel's. The transport ship airlock finished its cycle while the assemblage of aspiring goons loitered with duffel bags slung over shoulders and bored looks masking varying stages of anxiety. Gases whooshed through tubes and vents, heavy metal doors slammed together and squealed as unlubricated areas dragged. When the massive doors finally opened, light poured in from the dock to frame a mustachioed blond man in a black uniform with his hands behind his back. Black uniformed guards rushed up to them and began a hurried search. Pat-downs, detector wands, straight-up opening and rifling bags. Knives, swords, drugs were left alone. The new arrivals snarled and grumbled, but they'd been warned to expect it, and at least it went fast. Security moved from front to back haphazardly, searching some people twice and others not at all, and more than one of the fighters kicked themselves for not trying to smuggle their guns through.
"Welcome to Captain John Wayne Koganusan's station," the man barked in a less than welcoming manner as his crew retreated behind him.
Rommel recognized the clear signs of stick-up-the-ass syndrome.
"I cannot, by Anaconda Consolidated policy, prevent you from boarding this station, but I can damn well make sure you know and obey my rules."
Thanks for tuning in, Nicole Berlino. At that point, every attention wandered, and nobody, including the man's own fidgeting, nose-picking honor guard, heard his lengthy lecture about fighting, gunplay, and getting spaced. They'd each gotten their own instructions anyway, which had included, from Feeney, "Don't piss off McMasters, just smile and nod until he finally shuts up. Don't bring a gun aboard, and get yourself to my hotel as soon as you can." Or, from Angelica, "Ignore the lecture from station security. Sell your Sell your firearms before boarding the station if you can. Otherwise, write them off as a loss. Come singly or in pairs to the Lady Luck Casino without attracting undue attention." The few who had gained employment with McMasters himself were told,
"I will provide an edifying lecture on station security rules and procedures. You need not attend to it yourself, as it does not apply to you, but pay close attention to make sure the others do."
Geronimo Rommel scratched his ass while he listened to the more interesting drone of a ventilation fan with a bad bearing that kind of had an off-kilter, on-again, off-again rattle, a little like a tiny drum solo. He hefted a duffel bag that barely concealed a stolen fire axe, wrapped in his underwear so that he figured nobody would investigate too closely. He was pretty sure that was a genius move, the most recent of several, and congratulated himself on it again as he walked as nonchalantly as a badass like him could with the group heading for the Ad Astra Hotel. 3,000 credits, here he came. Geronimo Rommel, meanwhile, grinned like an idiot and shuffled his way toward the casino through the Galleria, glancing up at all the other fighters trying, and failing, to look inconspicuous as they moseyed out with him toward Del Rio's meeting point. He glanced over at that McMasters guy, who kinda fumed and tried to glare in every direction at once. Finally, only two toughs remained standing in the port. A rough-looking woman with a shotgun openly displayed on her shoulder. Despite a natural disinclination to hard thinking, Rommel was carefully considering his position. He ran his hand over his head in a sheepish gesture, then on an impulse offered it to McMasters to shake.
"Geronimo,"
he rumbled, talking slowly as though unfamiliar with the shape of the word.
"Geronimo,"
he rumbled, talking slowly as though unfamiliar with the shape of the word.
"At your service. Only I go by Fergus Capper, if you don't mind. A guy like me can't be too careful with his real name."
McMasters hesitated before taking it, then pumped it with some enthusiasm.
Of course, Mr. Capper. I got your message. I merely forgot. Good to have another military man on the crew."
He stopped and stepped back to get a better look at them, his face reflecting conflicted thoughts.
"Two's enough,"
he said aloud, and obviously didn't believe it.
"The cream of the crop, anyway. You must be Cynthia, then. Welcome, both of you. Let's get you into uniform and on the roster."
Rommel lay on his bunk, the only bunk in one of the transport ship's few private cabins. He counted his credits again and reminded himself that 2,000 profit for doing nothing but staying on board a ship for a couple of weeks without risking his hide or his guns, that was worth some cabin fever. Let those other three jerks take the risks, if they were so keen to get their fight on. That Sun Tzu guy said to fight if circumstances were favorable, and if they weren't, Well, all right, he didn't explicitly say to sell your identity 3 times and run away if circumstances sucked, but Rommel felt that the old buzzard would have approved. He just had a single moment of doubt, wondering what would happen when his old friend on the mining ship got wind he'd been in the area. Might have been friendly to say hi, maybe, but he had to grin at the idea of her stumbling on one of those chumps wearing his own illustrious name. He wondered which one it would be. The docking clamps finally released with hull-shaking thumps. His smile broadened as he listened to the chatter of a handful of voices relieved at getting the hell off Station 35. They sounded tense, unhappy, in need of some relaxation. They needed a good solid dose of vitamin R, of which he, Geronimo Rommel, was the universe's only source. A job. Jane! Feeney leaned over the stairway to loom above the small crowd. The newcomers had shuffled in full of anxious bravado and been introduced around. Looked like a half dozen new fighters, bedraggled and lean from the long space flight. The dregs and leftovers of the grimiest stations, washed out of some navy or merchant fleet, or on the run. Bloodshot, dark-ringed eyes full of cunning, fingers always straying toward weapons. The miner had been sitting, bored, as the various goons, new and old, tried their best to impress each other, with stories about their martial and sexual prowess on the one hand, and pharmaceutical tolerance on the other. One grinning moron crowed that he'd saved up and was having a chainsaw printed. Feeney located her and fixed his eyes down on her from the railing. "Lend me one of your expensive hands, won't you? One of my generous supporters isn't feeling so forthcoming. Why don't you take a couple of my new boys and girls and go put this gentleman in the giving mood?" The miner scratched her neck, feeling a weight in the pit of her stomach. "Who?" "Man named Peder Finn, a few decks down. Does some distilling. He used to share his profits like a good little boy, and I always rewarded him with brisk business, very brisk. But lately, not a credit." Feeney's smiling face had some tightness behind it, she thought, angry at something. When she'd stared back at him long enough that he looked like he might say something, she nodded once to acknowledge the order. That name rang a bell, and the association with booze clinched it. She'd liked Finn, but cover was cover. You, she said, pointing out 3 seedy, rough, and less than toothy specimens, ones who'd been boasting about busting heads and robbing locals. She had no idea if they were new or not. "Can you beat up someone without killing him?" They exchanged lazy and amused looks.
"Probably not,"
the short, pimply one said with a leer. "Good enough." The miner walked so fast they had to jump to keep up. She took the service exit to into the back halls, then the back doors into the big circular corridor that Blue, Con, and the others had led her through. She wasn't totally sure of the route, but she mumbled something about avoiding patrols, and that was apparently enough to bluff the 3 clowns into thinking she knew where she was going. Anyway, she had a map in her heads-up display now, and the roundabout route gave her a time to think. They grumbled about her decision to take an elevator down. Mary had drilled into them that they were ambush risks, and while she admired the tactical thinking, she was firm. "Anyone dumb enough to mess with the 4 of us, they'll get what's coming." That seemed to mollify them. She wanted time to think and look, and from the back of the elevator she finally got a good view of her 3 companions. The biggest and meanest of the 3, the guy who'd boasted about being on the run for killing 3 people, carried a kind of mace-looking weapon that looked like it had been printed from a medieval recreation catalog. It had a fat 4-sided metal head with sharpened corners. His bare arms had some serious muscle to them, but she thought he looked like a gym rat more than a fighter. Strong, but slow. The skinny, nervous-looking one looked to be a knife fighter, maybe even a good one. She was on some kind of stimulant, judging by the way her eyes darted, pupils narrowed to dots, and she couldn't keep her long, nimble fingers off her knives. She kept half unsheathing them, showing a couple centimeters of scratched and pitted blade, then shoving them back in. The last one, short and pimply, had a fire axe that reminded her of that punk of Angelica's she'd had to kill. The axe wasn't sharpened, and it looked like it hadn't been used, but he fingered its edge with a dreamy look, and she remembered he'd told a story of beating the shit out of a lawyer like it was the funniest thing in the world. The goons had cackled as he'd stumblingly relayed how he demanded the password off the poor jerk who'd tried to insist it was some kind of mistake. 2 slow fighters, she decided, with maybe some power behind them, and 1 quick one.
Looking forward to a proper fight?
The miner forced some cheer into her voice.
Damn right,
said the mace wielder. He spun the weapon in his hand so that the sharpened edges caught the wan industrial light.
All this tiptoeing around, not wanting to make waves around that security fucker who took my guns, makes me puke.
The other 2 made approving noises and offered sage observations such as, "Fuck that guy," and the miner nodded. They'd all been on edge, and she could tell her own presence keyed them up worse. The elevator lurched as it halted, making her drop into a crouch, and the doors shuddered open. She tried not to think about how long it had been since it had seen any kind of maintenance, even before the fighting started. Of course, anything that put it out of commission would knock out gravity, too, she was pretty sure. Probably. She ushered her crew out quickly. The heads-up map showed a couple twists to the corridor, with Finn's compartment taking up a good chunk of reconfigured space well ahead. They walked for a minute before the miner raised her hand and brought the company to a halt. It was a good spot, without sight lines in most directions thanks to those twists in the corridor and a strangely built-out living compartment. No hatches in sight. They'd passed a few security cameras, most obviously defunct, but there weren't any in view here.
"Something seems off," she said.
They looked at her with naked apprehension. She pointed to the guy with the axe.
"I don't like it. Go up ahead and check it out. Don't run, don't fight. Just walk out, look, and come right back. Go slow."
He looked relieved when she said, "Don't fight," and when she finished her instruction, he nodded sharply and turned the corner. With him gone, she visibly relaxed and turned to the guy with the mace.
"That's a hell of a weapon," she said. "While we're waiting, you mind if I take a swing?"
He grinned broadly, showing gaps and broken teeth and sharing some impressively bad breath.
"If you think you can lift it."
He hefted it one-handed, and she dutifully gave it a dubious look. She eyed it up and down, to his evident amusement.
"Hold this,"
she told the knife fighter, who had to quickly put her knives away in order to take the miner's sheathed sword with the clasp locked. Freed of that, the miner made a show of stretching both hands and accepting the mace. It was heavy enough as it was, but she exaggerated its heft, and the 2 goons laughed as she let it almost hit the deck. She grinned good-naturedly, feeling familiar tightness and warmth in her elbows, wrists, and shoulders, as her augments gave her a little extra strength. Not much, just a notice that they'd been engaged, a friendly warning that if she overdid it, they'd tear her muscles, stretch her tendons, and snap her ligaments like forgotten dock tethers. The mace's owner chuckled as she visibly struggled to lift the weapon upright, and she showed her genuine appreciation for the craft that went into the weapon. It was newly printed, she saw, and well-balanced. She raised it unsteadily, then turned and smashed the knife fighter on the top of her head, bringing it down hard as her augments could manage. Then spun and slammed the butt of the weapon into its owner's gut. Tossing the mace, she pulled the knife from its scabbard on her thigh and drove the blade into the man's throat. They died with a clatter but no other noise, and she had to step back fast from the rapidly spreading blood. She grabbed her sword back and after a moment plucked the mace one-handed from the path of the blood, marveling at the impressive dent it had put in the deck. Then she stood at the corner. She waited, heart pounding and listening hard until she heard faint steps. When the punk turned the corner, she brained him, too. After taking a moment to breathe and collect herself, the miner leaned over the blood to put the mace next to its owner's hand, swapped out the knife in his neck for one off the knife fighter's jacket, then sprinted for the elevator. She hated to put herself in that contraption again, but it gave her a minute to examine herself, wipe some blood spatter from her face and hands, clean and sheathe the knife, and put on a properly bored expression. She got into her computer's messaging system and dictated a few quick alterations. By then, the doors opened, and she needed to start walking. She didn't hurry back to the hotel despite the overwhelming urge to run. She tossed the bloodied cloth in a corner, checked that it hadn't re-soiled her fingers. The rear doors opened for her, and the couple of toughs hanging out there perked up but let her pass. She went straight through the still milling crowd of toughs and soldiers awkwardly chatting each other up to Feeney's office. She knocked once and let herself in. Feeney looked up from his desk, surprised and blinking. "Well," she said, sounding impatient, "what's up?"
"Hey, done already? By God, you do fast work."
She frowned. "No, I'm not done. You called me back. What's up?"
"I didn't know such thing."
"Come back. Just you. Trouble. F." She read from her message screen. "It's from you, or at least it says it is. You didn't send it?" He stood, wide-eyed and alarmed.
"No!"
The miner swore loudly and turned to run. They're all dead. Screwball tried not to look at the bodies on the floor, and tried not to step in the blood, and tried not to laugh at Ditz, stoned and pathetically fighting off the cleaning robot with poorly placed kicks.
"What the hell are you doing? Stop that, you idiot!"
Feeney snapped, and then paid Ditz no more mind. He went back to staring down at the 3 dead people on the deck and the huge pool of stinking blood. That was one of the new guys right off the transport ship. Duff, Screwball was pretty sure he'd been called, when he forced himself to look. And the chick was Siobhan. Shiv. He'd slept with her once. Siobhan, sorry. I just got the joke, I'm slow. And the chick was Siobhan. Shiv. He'd slept with her once. Feeney had collected Screwball and Ditz and 3 more of them, plus the lady with the sword, and brought them straight to this carnage. He'd made them go through the body's pockets for credit chips, and then had just begun staring.
"Well,"
the old man finally snapped at the swordswoman, Jane.
"what is this?"
She looked at him blankly. "They're dead."
"Brilliant, Holmes. Any other deductions?"
She stared down at the bodies, and looked as blank and dumbfounded as Screwball felt. The old man had been giving the corpses a suspicious look. After a long, uncomfortable silence, Feeney clucked his tongue against his teeth.
"I'm disappointed, my dear Mick. I really am. Hand me your sword, will you?"
Screwball saw her hesitation, even if the old man didn't. She fiddled with the release at her belt while looking up at Feeney and the rest of them with an expression that made him want to be elsewhere. Then, after another moment where he wasn't sure he was breathing, the sword was up and away from her hip, still sheathed. Feeney took it without really looking at her, and instead examined the weapon in its black fabric sheath. He weighed it in his hands, then used it as a stick to lift Duff's arm away from the mace and drop it again, and then to nudge the knife still embedded in the poor bastard's throat. It made his whole head wiggle.
"I'm getting tired of traitors,"
Feeney said in a mild tone, almost conversationally. Screwball felt a chill go down his spine, and even Ditz seemed to sober up. He kicked the cleaning robot again, but didn't put much spirit into it. Feeney stared down at the bodies, his face pale and his lips pursed tightly so that they were white. He didn't look up to see the effect his words were having on his bodyguards. He ignored them all, poking his dead soldiers with the sheathed sword. He stood a long while with the sword wedged under Shiv's arm. Screwball found himself staring into the reflection of the overhead lights in the dark, glistening blood, and he jumped when the old man let the woman's dead arm fall. He returned the sword to its owner without comment, and she hung it on her belt.
"This fellow killed the others."
Feeney said, louder than before, and confident. Got the drop on that one. What did you call him? Squealer? Must have figured he couldn't take you and them together, Jane, even if he got the jump on you. He wouldn't have got the jump on me, she said, and from the look on her face, Screwball believed her. Feeney went on like he hadn't heard her. If he'd pulled this off, he could have hidden the bodies, and we'd have assumed all three of them dead, and you were the last to see them. He'd have gotten a nice bonus from that witch. He sneered. Witch? The swordswoman looked confused. Angelica? Of course, Angelica! My God, all these new people. It must have been only too easy to bribe one to pretend to join up. I should have tried it myself. Damn. Not a brilliant plan, mind, but not bad. No, not bad. She gave him a wary look that Screwball couldn't quite understand. It almost looked like she was reacting to unexpected good news, almost. So she was trying to frame me for this? Feeney sighed. Well, I didn't hire you for your brains, did I? She was trying to frame you, surely. Homicidal witch must have thought she could set me against you and kill 2 good soldiers in one stroke. But for this fine lass... He nodded his chin at Shiv, then let out another great sigh. There'll be a reckoning for this, believe you me. The witch's little spies want to play rough. Well, I was playing the hard game before she was born, winning it. Let the robots have them, he barked, turning on his heels. We've no use for corpses. Come on. A visit to Finn. The miner finally let herself relax. Homicidal witch must have thought she could set me against you and kill 2 good soldiers in one stroke, Feeney went on. But for this fine lass... He nodded at the twitchy little knife fighter, who seemed to have become a heroine in death, just like the guy with the mace had become a villain. The miner wondered what they'd have made of their posthumous roles. Probably preferred they not be posthumous. Let the robots have them, Feeney said, snapping her out of her thoughts. We've no use for corpses. Come on. The 5 bodyguards he'd brought seemed all too glad to step away from the blood and the stink. The stoned one grudgingly let the cleaning robot get by him, and it gleefully plunged into the mess, splashing and guzzling into some internal tank. The miner stayed put. I'll be along in a bit, she said. I still need to talk to Pater Finn about his donations. Feeney looked at her with a kind of wonder. Aye, he said finally, that you do. I'm glad someone's got their eye on the bottom line. Why don't you take to... He looked nervous then, and glanced up around them. They all seemed to have felt suddenly very aware of how far they were from the hotel. Feeney looked relieved when she shook her head. I'll do it on my own this time. If he's not feeling generous, I'll drag him out here for some inspiration. Feeney raised his eyebrows at her. The bodyguards looked a little put off themselves. You're a cold one, my girl, he said, and it sounded like respect. Don't kill him. Big white tanks lined the walls of the enormous space the map marked as Finn's place. They hung from the ceiling, looming metal cylinders that tapered down to tapped points, each with a readout and controls, and each big enough to shove a person into. They dripped, and the place stank of malt and alcohol, a heavy molasses fug that was oppressive in the humidity. The low hum she'd heard in the passageway had grown to a rumble as she got closer, and inside the room she felt it through the floor. She walked softly, peering in and around the various tanks, looking for labels, but finding none. The tanks were numbered, but that meant nothing. The smell grew strong enough that she wondered whether she was getting a contact buzz just from inhaling the fumes. A dozen steps into the long room, and she stopped. She took her sheathed sword from her belt and rapped the hilt against one of the pipes. Droplets of blood flew and spattered the walls. The deep clanging echoed. And a moment later a familiar short, wiry guy poked his head in from a side door, his bald dome beading sweat. His eyes went wide on seeing her. "Hello, hello," he said, looking like he was about to bolt.
I didn't hear you come in."
I'm quiet. I'm quiet, she said, raising her voice to be heard over the low rumble. "We met earlier at Takata's bar." His expression took a moment to register recognition, like he was on a time delay, but then his nervous face split into a crooked-toothed grin.
Yes. Hi, did he send you?"
"No," she said casually. "Feeney did." The brief relaxation turned to obvious panic. She held up a hand to calm him, the one not holding the sword. "I don't care what he wants," she said, keeping her tone friendly. "I'm not going to do anything to you, but I'm curious why you stopped paying him off."
"Well,"
he still looked like he wanted to jump and run. He looked around the room instead of answering her, like goons might spring out from between the tanks.
truth is, I'm broke."
She frowned. "Didn't Takata just buy some vodka off you?"
"He did. He did. Good stuff. But buy isn't the right word. Barter, you see? Barter. He'll make me dinner sometimes, give me some beer. I really do get tired of vodka, even drinking it. I tried mixing it with a bunch of stuff, but it never comes out very good."
"Like the gym?" He made a face full of resentment, but didn't dispute it. "So Feeney won't take payment in booze?" He looked surprised.
"It never came up. He buys it back off me with the credits he makes me cough up."
The miner rubbed her chin. Lot of people bartering these days?"
Everyone. If you keep too many credits on hand, Angelica or Feeney come tax you. I think the security guy tips them off. The company rep's letting us pay our rent a little at a time, and she doesn't know how much space I'm using now. If we ever have too much money, we can buy stuff off Mr. Shine."
He turned and waved at a shelf full of electronics and tools. The miner frowned at it. "What do you need a radiation-hardened multimeter for?"
Nothing. But Mr. Shine'll buy it back, pretty much the same price. And he won't tell, probably because of that chicken pox."
She blinked. "Chicken pox?"
Yeah, he said Feeney and Angelica had chicken pox. It was weird. I thought it was weird.
She tilted her head and looked at the little man. If he was having her on, he had a damn fine poker face. "Do you mean he said, a pox on both your houses?"
That's it. Yep. So he won't let on when I have cash."
"So why aren't you under his protection?" Finn looked bashful all of a sudden. He scratched the back of his head.
"It's complicated. Complicated, you know."
"You used to work for Feeney, too." The flinch told her she'd scored, and you and this guy Shine didn't get along.
"That might be, it might."
He gave her a hard look.
"So you're collecting for Feeney, that it?"
She shrugged. "Yes and no. I can't go back empty-handed."
"So what, you're going to beat me up again?"
She shook her head. "Nah, I was more thinking, what happened to that batch of gin?" He looked horrified for a second, then grinned. "But I do have a price," she said. "I want to talk to this Mr. Shine." Shiny. The miner stayed at the back of the hotel lobby and watched the newcomers mixing awkwardly. She was curious what Feeney meant when he had promised to show them the ropes, and was only a little disappointed that it turned out to be mostly Feeney waving away complaints that their fancy guns had been taken away and making grand promises. Then pretty much everyone got drunk. The evening wound on and got drunker and rowdier. They toasted their fallen, heroic comrade, whose name turned out to be Siobhan, and booed the makeshift villain, whose name turned out to be Dop or something. She never did find out the other poor jerk's name. Some twitchy little creep was trying to get people interested in helping him get the printers to make him a chainsaw. A few patrol shifts staggered out, in bigger groups now and heavily armed. They came back blooded and thirsty. The miner wasn't offered many drinks. She took a few to be friendly and poured them out into the fake plants without making much effort not to be seen. without making much effort to not be seen. Nobody seemed to care. The acrid odors of various pharmaceuticals afire crossed her nostrils, and she moved a couple of times to avoid a contact high or worse. That pretty much left her alone, and she was fine with that. When she judged them at about the right spot for it, she unveiled the gin. Feeney had groaned, but accepted her earnest explanation that Finn had no cash, and when she pretended to be proud of herself, he didn't have the booze-soaked heart to not write off the debt. Mary stood by and smirked, a nice bonus. The welcome party wound down when Feeney went upstairs out of exasperation with a sudden uptick in puking. The welcome party wound down when Feeney went upstairs out of exasperation with a sudden uptick in puking pairs and trios. Oh, I didn't see the semicolon. The welcome party wound down when Feeney went upstairs out of exasperation with a sudden uptick in puking. Pairs and trios gave each other suggestive looks as they wandered off to dark corners. A few fistfights broke out and ended in mutual exhausted collapse, and others just passed out wherever they happened to be. The miner wasn't tired. Her implants could keep her up for days if she let them, and anyway, she had finally gotten the ping from Finn. She slipped out the back without too much trouble. There were guards asleep in easy chairs at the service entrance, behind makeshift barricades of tables and gym mats. There was another watch point by the stairs. That was new. It was also abandoned already. She thought she knew which directions the patrols went, but didn't put it past Mary to hide some of them. So she went quietly, but maintained an air that she had every right to be where she was. Feeney's crew had simply destroyed the cameras around their territory. The miner had pieced together that the alternative was to be spied on by either Del Rio or McMasters, or both. It was 6 flights down before she saw one intact and with a lit power indicator. She stopped and watched it a while, thinking. Feeney wouldn't know about her visit, but who else would? In the end, she decided that this close to Shine's territory, it was here with his blessing, so destroying it might cause complications. She willed her legs back into movement and continued her descent. Down in the bottom decks, the pipes were bigger and louder, and the conduits were as thick as her leg. Outside of the stairwells and in the maze of passageways, the miner felt like she was in the digestive system of a giant, an unpleasant sensation not helped by humidity so high water beaded on the cold water and gas pipes, or by the various smells like combustion and fermentation. Finn's instructions hadn't been the best, but it was hard to get too lost. Just go down, and they'll find you. She could hear footsteps on the other side of the pipes as she walked. Scurrying movements, sudden. She kept walking, pretending to pay them no heed, even as a chill ran down her back. Whispering from ahead. A white-haired head poked out briefly, then ducked back behind the ductwork.
You lost?
She turned, cursing herself for not having heard someone come up behind her. He was a big guy, heavy-set and middle-aged, but in good shape. He wore dirty coveralls and had a badly shaved head that left little tufts here and there in the hard-to-reach places. His broad, stubbled chin jutted out like he was about to object to something. He held a good-sized shotgun in his thick-fingered hands. Something about his heavy frame, his level, incurious gaze, and the way he carried himself reminded her of a bull. He'd worn a tuxedo before, and it was the guy she'd come looking for. "You're Mr. Shine," she said, only partly a question. Behind him, people began filling the corridor. They came from hatches she hadn't seen, in the walls, in the deck, in the ceiling. Lined faces, some gray or thin hair. Grim expressions, and hands holding wrenches and pipes and guns. She could hear them shuffling in behind her, too.
I'm the SOB they call that,
Shine rumbled.
I hate that nickname.
Sorry, that's just what Takata called you. He frowned and moved his jaw forward even further.
Kenichi Takata?
She bit back the impulse to ask if there was another one. That's him. What do I call you?
My name is Mohammed Shinagawa, but I think that ship has flown. Shine'll do. From what I've been hearing and the vids they've been sharing around, you must be Mick. Or Jane.
She nodded and continued looking him over. The shotgun hadn't wavered while they were talking, not that she was necessarily planning to take it away from him. The pipes vented something humid and effluent, but it didn't seem to bother him, so she didn't let it bother her. She'd come looking for him, but having found him, he had the look of someone who had something to say.
You're a pain in my ass, he said, after ruminating on it, cocking his head. A shit stirrer. I don't like you.
Some of the faces behind him nodded, but she mentally filed away the fact that some didn't. Some looked troubled when he said it. I didn't ask you to like me. He snorted, and the tip of the shotgun's barrel dipped and rose a finger's breadth.
You came within arm's reach. That's asking me to like you.
Fair enough, she said. You going to shoot me? He looked surprised, then faintly sheepish.
Not planning to, just, I don't know, making conversation. Keeps things friendly. What do you want?
The miner folded her arms and studied the man. He cleaned up well, she knew that from the pictures around the hotel. He was pretty imposing in person. Maybe he still had the tux. You ever think about running this station? He raised his eyebrows.
That's a dangerous question.
There's a dangerous answer to it.
There aren't any answers to it that aren't dangerous. I'm thinking.
The corner of her mouth lifted. Then there's no special harm in any one of them, she said. He still looked like he had something to say, but this time she cut him off. Feeney and Angelica aren't stable, Shine. They both think they're clever. He snorted again at that, but it wasn't disagreement. They both think they can win, and that's not going to end well. I figured you knew that when you came down here. I figured they knew it. She pointed with her chin at the small, grimy crowd behind him, and they seemed taken aback at being acknowledged. So let me be blunt. I can clear those two away, but if I leave a power vacuum, will you fill it, or just let things go to hell? He didn't answer right away.
I'm a casino man, he said at last. I understand risk, and I'm comfortable with it. They're not. Del Rio thinks risk is something to be stamped out. John thinks you grab hold of the most interesting risk and go along for the ride. Neither one's right.
She's too cautious, he's too incautious. I've noticed.
I bet you have. Me, I know that risk is something to be evened out. You've got to lay your bets if you want to get ahead, but you don't have to go all in. You just have to see things for what they are. For example, I don't trust a hired gun who uses words like incautious.
He grinned to show he was kidding, or to pretend he was.
A brain behind a trigger is another risk to my mind, maybe a big one.
She might notice you didn't answer her dangerous question, maybe? He lapsed back into silence.
Do I ever think about running this station? I do run this station. We do. We keep the children from playing the games that might get too dangerous. They'll stab each other and shoot each other, but they won't get into the air or water. They won't destroy the food supply. Tom McMasters won't touch us. Even the company rep and the station master don't bother us.
You're helping it grind on, she said, aware now that she wasn't just addressing him. If it grinds on long enough, this place'll die.
No, it won't. Some powerful people don't want it to. We don't want it to.
He leaned the shotgun back against his shoulder and jutted his chin out.
What you're really asking is, do I want to run the fun bits? Not just the casino, but the long games and the salvage ops, the light touches and the old man's other enterprises. Other little enterprises. You want to know if I want to be called boss, is that right? Balls to that. I just want my casino back, and I'll get it back if I'm patient. Fortunately for you, being patient means not shooting one of Feeney's people, even if I think she has it coming.
If the miner didn't understand herself to be dismissed, she got the message when he turned and left. He didn't have to shoulder his way through the Morlocks, but they closed ranks behind him. That wall of grimly determined bodies, and the noises behind her of the corridor emptying out, made it clear which direction they wanted her to go, and she obliged. Anyway, that was the answer she wanted. The spider in her web. Angelica Del Rio sat upright in her bed. By the time she woke all the way up, the jolt of adrenaline was just starting to wear off, but still left her heart pounding and muscles tensed. The first thing on her sleep-addled mind when the alarm went off was that her brother was in trouble. When she calmed down enough to shake off the panic and look at the monitor, though, it had been a different alert. Someone was in the stairwell behind Feeney's hotel going down to the Morlocks. She frowned at the image of Feeney's new fighter, alone. Angelica was sure it was the same woman who started the fight in the Galleria, wearing the sword she'd killed Chucky with. Why was Feeney sending her down to talk to Shine in the middle of the night? She'd seen Mary once or twice, obviously going to try to persuade him to switch allegiance. But this woman was a fighter, by all accounts, not a diplomat. Was it an assassination attempt? Angelica got out of bed and pulled on her robe. She hated that robe. It was nice silk, scavenged from a clothing store, left empty when the owner fled, but it wasn't hers. Hers was still over in the hotel where she'd left it 6 months ago. Hers was warm and fluffy, and she'd had it for years. She had the sudden mental image of the old man wearing it himself out of spite, and chuckled without meaning to. The fighter walked past the stairway camera without acknowledging it. Probably didn't know it was there. And then she was gone, down the stairs where Angelica didn't have access to any video feeds. All she had was an unchanging image and a quandary.
"Tea," she said aloud, drumming her fingers on the desk. "I need tea."
It would take someone a couple more minutes to get to the lowest decks by stairs, and a while longer to actually find Shine, unless they were meeting by appointment. She frowned down into her dwindling stash of tea leaves. Not the real stuff, she hadn't had that in months. The bioengineered hydroponic stuff wasn't bad, and it had caffeine, but she was even running out of that. She needed the use of her brain just then, though, so she shook a few leaves into her mug. Mr. Shine's mug, really, stolen when she commandeered the casino, and still tasting faintly of his coffee and cardamom, and dispensed hot water into it. The warm steam and gentle grassy aroma relaxed her, helped her to think. She'd promised Shine she wouldn't spy on him, so just contacting him and warning him was out. Anyway, if this wasn't an assassination attempt, he'd resent it. Nor could she simply send people down. He'd see it as an invasion. Doing nothing and waiting didn't sit well with her. She glanced through the other cameras, looked for the handful of night owls prowling the corridors around her various assets in the lower decks. A crew of 4 looking drunk, that was all. An ambush might work, but she'd seen firsthand what had happened to the last group that had come upon that swordswoman. They had probably been sober, too. Some of her crew might flat out refuse to take the woman on, and if they started refusing her orders, things would go south fast. Angelica sipped her tea and thought, scanning the monitors idly. The old frustration rose up in her, felt like acid in her throat. All these stupid games, all the wasted money and sleep and opportunity. Shine used to call her loss-averse, and laughed and said he made a lot of money off people like her. But she'd done well so far, damn it all, carved out a lot of territory and kept the old man back on his heels. And let them think she wouldn't take risks. If Raj's little gamble paid off, she might just sweep the table. A nervous-looking trio caught her attention. Not too far from the swordswoman, and not too far from backup. A 7-on-1 fight might... She frowned. She didn't recognize them. She tapped on the face recognition, but it came up blank. They weren't any of hers. Morlocks? Not seedy-looking armed punks like that, and not so close to her territory. What was Carter's plan? Go for the foot soldiers and get them mad at the new woman? 4 drunks and the element of surprise, that could do the job. Nothing major, just a little sucker punch to keep morale up while they waited on Raj. Angelica pushed the talk button, enjoyed for a moment the look of shock at her disembodied voice on the 4 tiny faces on her video screen, and rapidly laid out her instructions. Then she let go of the button and watched them hurry out of view. She could watch the fight, maybe, if there happened to be a camera nearby, or if one of them had a lapel cam. Watching seemed like the responsible thing to do. Or the thing Raj would do, which was usually the opposite of responsible. She found herself repulsed by the thought of watching, though. Some general, she just wanted this damn fight over. She finished her tea, took a sleeping pill, and went back to bed. And that is where we have to call it for today. Actually, I lied. That is not where we have to call it for today. I thought it was later. I can do another chapter.
Or we'll do another chapter. How about that, eh?
Dock blocked. The miner didn't dawdle, heading back to a part of the station she could more easily justify her presence in. Shine had given the answer she'd wanted to hear. Nobody who wanted to run Station 35 should by any means be allowed to do it, was her opinion, and he passed that test. She had gotten back to the hotel without too much trouble, and was thinking of returning to her stolen room to read when some kids stumbled through the hotel doors, bloodied and beaten up. 2 of them dragged a third between them, and while the 2 doing the dragging didn't look so hot, the third looked downright bad. They evicted a snoring drunk from the couch and dumped their buddy on it. She'd been beat up pretty thoroughly. Both eyes were swelled shut, and a stream of pink saliva stretched from her mouth. Her black clothes shone with blood, though the miner couldn't see an obvious wound. "Why didn't you take her to the doctor?" she asked. Mills wouldn't treat the gangsters, and anyway, it was a hell of a walk down to his office, but there was that clinic right off the Galleria. One of the girls had gone over the evening before, and Mary had tersely explained payment when the miner gave her an inquisitive look. The shorter goon grinned at her, his teeth slicked with blood.
He's busy dealing with the damage we did, eh?
Angelica's asshole's pushed us off, grumbled the taller one as he swabbed gingerly at a bloodied nose. He didn't bother looking at her as he talked. They've got the door guarded. The miner considered that. She was weakening Feeney's side to try to force a confrontation, but she didn't want them so weak they couldn't fight at all. Anyway, she could have need of a sawbones herself. The girl bleeding on the couch coughed a red spray and groaned. The miner went back to examining her. After some prodding and some, "That hurt?"
Shit, yes, it hurt, motherfucker!
Back and forth, she decided the kid had a broken leg, a couple cracked ribs, but probably not a collapsed lung, broken teeth, and a concussion. Maybe more than that. That was about the limit of the miner's dim recollection of field medicine. "Don't let her sleep," the miner said. "Keep her awake and don't give her any booze or downers."
Meth okay?
She gave him a blank look, started to answer, stopped, then went back to the broken leg. "Get me something long and straight."
I got something long.
The short goon stopped talking when the taller one slapped him upside the head.
"For the leg, asshole,"
the taller one said, then walked off muttering. There was a sharp crack, and a moment later the miner was being handed a hollow plastic bar stool leg. Its chrome-like finish splintered and crumbled where it had been broken off. She rubbed off the splinters and then tied it to the girl's broken limb, tested it gently.
Fuck! God damn it!
She tested it as gently as she could be bothered to, and after some adjustment, pronounced the splint sturdy. "All right," said the miner. "She's set for now. Come with me." She dimly remembered where the other doctor's office was, and walked straight there, flanked by the 2 bruised goons. Said the shorter one when the office came in sight, just a modest entranceway right off the eastern spur, uncomfortably close to security, but they seemed closed up for the night. "Dr. Joff Philippe," MD, read the neat blue letters on the frosted window. The discreet thing to do would be to have her two wingmen stick close and try to be unobtrusive. Finish this thing quickly before attracting notice. 2 would be plenty. "Get back up," she muttered. "Have them hang out just outside the Galleria so nobody comes up behind me." That would be indiscreet enough, she decided, but still defensible. Now the second part. 3 of Angelica's soldiers loitered by the open door, looking about as haggard and hungover as Feeney's crew. They noticed the miner's approach and drew an assortment of makeshift weapons. Only one had a proper weapon, a drawn military-style sword like her own, though chipped and scarred. Second-hand, then, a tidy euphemism for a weapon scavenged from some vet down on their luck or dead. The other 2 had club-looking things, deadly enough if they could land a solid blow. "Piss off," growled the swordswoman. She held her sword two-handed with a grip tight enough her knuckles were white. "Oh, piss off," growled the swordswoman. It's not the miner. She held her sword two-handed with a grip tight enough her knuckles were white. The miner shook her head, but didn't draw her weapon. "Doctor's neutral ground."
Not anymore. Get out of here.
The miner shook her head again. "Can't." Someone behind her said, but she couldn't afford to turn and look. She'd just have to trust them to fuck it up. Piss off. "Hey, Doc," the miner called out. "You have a patient in there?" A skinny man in a tatty white lab coat hesitantly poked his head out of the door behind Angelica's goons. His protruding eyes were fried egg white, and he stammered a consonant-free reply. "Shut up, Doc."
Shut up, Doc.
I keep getting them confused, and I don't know why.
Shut up, Doc,
said the swordswoman, not looking at him. She had nerve, the miner had to admit. Being shushed seemed to remind the guy he had a few vertebrae, and he used them.
"I'm seeing a patient, yes," he managed. "Don't kill each other out here, for God's sake. We'll be done in a few minutes."
"Fine," said the miner. "When you're finished, these folks will leave, and then you've got another one coming. She's next."
The hell we will,
the swordswoman said.
The hell she is.
The miner put her hand on her sword for the first time, gently resting it on the grip. Angelica's goons tensed like she'd drawn on them, and the doctor fled back inside. "If you don't leave, he'll have 3 more patients, and you'll have to wait your turn." A club wielder sneered from his position behind the woman with the sword.
"You're pretty goddamn sure of yourself."
"That's right." She saw the attack coming. The woman might have fenced, probably VR, but wasn't a proper sword fighter. Still, she didn't waste time waving her blade like a stick, and she came in low to use her center of gravity well. The miner drew with plenty of time, brought her weapon up one-handed, parried by simply slapping the other sword away, and then down two-handed while stepping to the right. Her blade met the other woman's arm as she tried vainly to correct for the miner's practiced and augmented quickness. The miner sliced through flesh and struck bone. It was over before the other goons on either side could react. The miner held her sword with the point down, dripping blood onto the deck, ready to bring it up if anybody else had any bright ideas. The swordswoman shrieked on the ground, her chipped sword forgotten beside her while she clutched at her right forearm, blood gushing between her fingers. Wound like that, fighting style like that, she'd be out of the game for a month at least. Suited the miner fine. "Stings, huh? Should have listened." When someone behind her said, again, she did turn. A group had formed behind her, 2 groups in fact, maybe 4 or 5 goons in each, all trying to watch each other and watch her at the same time. The doctor reappeared with a dazed, pale, tattooed young man trailing him, and knelt in the blood to administer aid. Angelica's other fighters stood uncertain with their makeshift clubs hovering at the ready, but not ready enough to be an obvious threat. The miner pulled a handkerchief and wiped down her blade with a show of nonchalance. "If I'd wanted to kill you 3, I would have. But this is neutral ground. She raised her voice, but not too much. Oh, she raised her voice, not too much, but she wanted to be heard.
All right, snapped the doctor. You've made your point. You, I'll treat. The rest of you, get out of here. Will your friend last another half hour?
The miner considered, then nodded.
Good. Come back in half an hour.
She stepped away, putting some distance between herself and Angelica's goons. That gave her a view of the crowds facing off, and she looked at them speculatively. If she joined Feeney's side in that one, the other side would probably melt away. Doc?
What now?
You're going to be busy. She turned and left past his office, walking away from the crowds. And heck with it, we'll do one more. Feeney watches the fight. Screwball peered out at the Galleria from the hotel windows, squinting against the dim light. He'd been woken up, still tipsy, and press-ganged into helping carry Tara to the doctor to get bandaged up. The doc had been pissed off about something, but Screwball hadn't paid much attention because of all the noise from the Galleria. Maybe 24 people were out there, yelling and jeering at each other from across the row of trees. He couldn't see Angelica's crew real well, but the fighters from Feeney's side looked hungover and confused, and he decided that I'd better report back was the better part of valor. He hadn't been the only one. It was either too late at night or too early in the morning. It was just the wrong damn time of day for that kind of thing, for his kind of people, and a lot of Feeney's crew stumbled around groggy in the hotel lobby, those who could actually be roused.
What's going on, eh?
Screwball jumped at the old man's peevish question. He turned, and Feeney's unshaven face stared at him with bloodshot eyes.
Some kind of fight,
Screwball ventured.
I know that. What of it? What's the matter?
Tara, Bull, and PJ were coming up from guard duty at the cookout and got jumped by some of Angelica's gang. Tara's leg got broke, but when they got to the doctor, Angelica's guys were already there and wouldn't let them in.
Feeney made an annoyed sound.
Doctor's neutral ground. Even that traitorous bitch Angelica knows that.
Yeah, but they got reinforcements or something, and it was really early, so nobody else was up. So Bull and PJ got that chick you hired with the sword, and she pushed them off.
Did she now?
The annoyance in his voice went away, and he sounded pleased.
Well, someone's earning their pay. What's that got to do with the fracas down there?
Screwball scratched his head and studied the crowd for a moment. A couple of people had weapons out and waved them unsteadily, but most of them seemed to have wandered in empty-handed.
I think they went out to see what was going on, mostly. But it was some of them and some of us, and none of us are going to be the first ones to leave.
Damn right,
Feeney said distractedly. He elbowed Screwball aside and examined the crowd, frowning.
But what are they going to do?
I don't think they've figured that out.
Feeney's frown twisted like he was sucking his teeth.
Where's Mick?
Who?
That girl I hired with the sword. Jane. You said she pushed them off from the doctors, but I don't see her down there.
Dunno, I never saw her this morning. I just heard she'd chased away Angelica's people.
He made unsatisfied noises.
Well...
He went back to scanning the milling crowd below.
What's your name?
Corbell,
Screwball said. Feeney glared at him, confused for a second.
Corbell.
The old man frowned, still staring down at the two crows facing up. Crows facing off below? Must be crowds, and it's just missing the D. Screwball sighed quietly.
Some of them call me
Oh, Screwball! That's right, yes.
Feeney grinned like he'd won a treat and winked.
Senior moment. They say there's nobody so dangerous as an old gangster, but old is old, eh?
Screwball tried to grin as his mind worked furiously around the trap in that question.
You're still sharp enough to cut, sir.
Nobody likes a brown-noser.
Feeney concentrated on the... Screwball tried to grin as his mind worked furiously around the trap in that question.
You're still sharp enough to cut, sir. Nobody likes a brown-noser.
Feeney concentrated on the Galleria, and Screwball was glad for the distraction. The crowd had grown, and the two sides were slowly moving toward each other. It was like watching waves lap at the sides of a filling waste tank, moving back and forth while inching forward. The crowd grew as wanderers and stragglers from both sides showed up, pushing the front lines toward each other.
Getting serious, Feeney murmured. Where the hell's McMasters? Ought to be putting a stop to it. Or Angelica. Rotten traitor ought to know better than to allow a fight in the damned Galleria. And where's Jane?
Maybe distracting McMasters.
Feeney didn't respond right away, but he looked worried.
She would, he admitted. She would at that.
He turned around to see a half-dozen more of his fighters rubbernecking for a view of the simmering crowd.
And what the hell are you doing up here? Get down there! What am I paying you for?
They all but fell over each other in their stumbling rush down the stairs. Weapons were out below on both sides.
I don't want to fight right now, Feeney muttered, but I'll be damned if I lose one. Where's Jane?
Screwball reluctantly sagged his shoulders and made to join the crowd, but Feeney clamped a cold, bony hand on his arm.
Not you, Corbell. Leaving me without a guard up here. What's the matter with you?
Sorry, sir, he said brightly. Just eager to help is all.
Feeney grunted.
I don't want suicidals, boy. No place for a man without common sense.
Screwball bit his lip, couldn't think of an answer that wouldn't get his head bitten off, and stayed quiet. He watched the fighters below menace each other. It was like some kind of ritual dance. Forward, wave something sharp and yell, then stumble back again when their counterpart did the same. Shouts of mingled anger and terror filled the Galleria. The result wasn't inevitable in its particulars, only in its effect. Yarbles inexpertly swung a nunchuck and hit himself in the face. Screaming and bleeding, he went down, and the battle was joined. And that is where we will call it for today. When I get my schedule for next week, I will tell people what my schedule for next week is. So there. I will know, you will know when I know, and probably not a moment sooner. Anyway, things are trucking along. If any of this seems familiar, you've probably seen the movie Yojimbo. Great Kurosawa flick. Highly recommend if you haven't. Well worth your time. Plot-wise, I think it's fairly similar to... Oh, what's the one? It's, I think that one's a Clint Eastwood. Fistful of Dollars, I think, basically has a similar plot. Lone stranger walks into town, plays everybody else off against each other. I think that's Fistful of Dollars. Or am I confusing it with the Bronson one? What's that one called with the harmonica sting? No, that's, I think, Once Upon a Time in the West. And that's different. Anyway. Showing off my lack of Western cred. What an embarrassment. Anyway. Yeah, that'll do it for today. When I have my schedule, I'll give it all to you. Not too many installments left. This one goes quickly. It's going quicker than I had hoped. After we get through this one, we will do Alien Clay by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And that one is quite an experience. I have yet to read anything bad by Mr. Tchaikovsky. He's a good one. We're going to be reading more of him in the future. Anyway, with that, I'll leave you all to it. Stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. Until next time, a toodaloo.